Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
I don't want to die. Please, God, I don't want to die.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
I don't want to die. Please have mercy on me. I was only trying to do what I thought was right.
On earth, as it is in heaven, give us this day our daily bread.
Jesus Christ, Edgar. Overreacting a bit, are we?
And forgive us. He opened his eyes. There was nothing. It was all white. The ground, the sky, the walls. Everything was white. Pure white. It was an enormous void of nothing. Or at least, the totality of white made it seem like nothing, even though Edgar was standing on something. It looked like nothing, but it was definitely something. However, whatever light source that existed here was not kind enough to help develop distance. There was no shading, no dimming of color farther away, no volume of any kind. Everything was the exact same shade of white without exception. Or nothing was. Mind-numbingly empty. He turned around. They did look a lot alike. A man stood there with his hands behind his back and a confident smirk on his face, completely at ease in these surroundings. He had the same long nose, the same squarish face, the same thin frame, but his hair was messy and long. He wore a trench coat and underneath a striped shirt with a blank white box in its center, black jeans and boots, reflective glasses. And he moved.
Oh, come now, Edgar. You can't say you're really surprised, can you?
Scriabin smiled at him. Edgar could not think of anything to say. He stared at the figment of his imagination without any real expression, too shocked for any emotion to leak through the logical breakdown that he was currently experiencing.
But how?
All he could think about were all those times he had spent on the phone, passing time by moving the toy's limbs when he was bored. Now the toy moved by himself. He moved with a grace and ease that shouldn't be possessed by things that didn't exist. And Scriabin didn't exist. He couldn't exist. Not like this. This wasn't what he looked like in that preview for the movie. It was like Edgar was staring at himself. A more attractive, confident, sarcastic version of himself. And that was what Scriabin was and couldn't be. Scriabin seemed to enjoy the attention. He knew what this was doing to Edgar. He had to know. He had to be able to feel the machinery in Edgar's mind shutting down.
My goodness. You certainly picked up some melodrama from our dear now deceased friend. Let me make this easier for you.
Scriabin snapped his fingers. After the whiteness around them absorbed the noise, the familiar feel of his glasses pressed against the bridge of Edgar's nose. His glasses. He must have lost them during the fight. The added clarity didn't make seeing Scriabin in person any better, though.
But how? How was this possible?
Edgar said, his voice hollow and thin in this huge expanse of nothing. Saying something out loud managed to break his mind out of the confused loops it had been trapped in, and his normal defense mechanisms began to resurface. Apathy, acceptance, detachment. Utter shock and surprise faded to confusion and vague curiosity.
Where am I? My favorite part.
Scriabin moved towards Edgar, although he wasn't sure exactly how. It was hard to tell if this place expanded into infinity, or just didn't expand at all. He closed the immeasurable distance between them and took hold of Edgar's chin, forcing him to look at his own confused reflection in his glasses.
Edgar, my dear, you're dead.
Edgar blinked at him for several seconds, all thoughts flatlined.
No, he said.
Scriabin just smirked at him in response, as if he'd expected just such a reaction.
Yes.
No,
I'm not dead. I can't be dead. That's ridiculous.
Edgar held out his arms to indicate the nothing all around them.
If I'm dead, then where's God? Where's Jesus and St. Peter?
Scriabin laughed at him. Edgar jerked his head away to break his grip.
God, I hate you so much.
Scriabin almost sounded pleased somehow, as Edgar turned away from him with his arms crossed.
I can't be dead. There's nothing here. There's no one here. Where is everyone? Where is this place? If this is the afterlife, there's no way I'd be alone here. I'm not the only person who's ever died. That doesn't make sense.
Scriabin circled around him back into his field of vision, still smiling, still too at ease, still too real. Briefly, Edgar looked at his feet to try and see how Scriabin was moving, but it was too disorienting to focus on for long. If he kept thinking about it, he was going to start thinking about falling. Was he falling right now? And that was going to make him dizzy, and he did not want to show any kind of weakness right now, not with Scriabin right here. Scriabin's smile grew wider, pleased again at something unspoken or unseen, and he held out his arms to indicate the white just as Edgar had.
Well, first off, you're not the only person here, obviously. If we're going to have any kind of productive conversation, it might behoove you to think a little before you speak.
Scriabin touched a hand to his chest, sarcasm running obvious through his words.
A daunting task to ask of you, I know, but I have faith in you, my boy.
Edgar kept his arms crossed, frowning.
A productive conversation. Usually a pipe dream with you. You never listen. But I do try.
Scriabin had his arms behind his back again, still smiling. It was even more infuriating to actually see it rather than just hear it in his voice.
After all, it's not like there's much else to do in here, is there?
Something in his tone was a bit accusatory, and Edgar tilted his head away from him slightly, his brow furrowed.
Where is this place anyway? It's not the afterlife. I know that. Do you?
Still smirking at him, and Edgar just gave him a silent, unamused stare. After a few seconds of quiet, Scriabin shrugged and continued.
Whether or not you believe it doesn't matter. It won't change what it actually is. Much like how your belief in God won't make him real, although that's not really interesting or relevant to your question. This, Edgar, is what your mind looks like on default. Safe mode. Any other metaphor you'd like to make. This is what your mind looks like when there's nothing here to clog it up. No mortal plane or petty responsibilities. Rather blank, And I should believe you. Why? Like I said, what you believe about what's happening is rather inconsequential. I mean, why should you trust my judgment after all?
Scriabin held out his arms, turning away from him.
It's not like I live here or anything. It's not like you constantly lie to me for your own amusement or anything,
Edgar said, in much the same tone of voice. Scriabin put his hands in his pockets, not overtly annoyed, but he didn't turn around. Edgar decided he scored a hit anyway.
I'm supposed to believe that I'm dead, and yet I'm also supposed to believe I'm inside my own mind. Is that the story you're going with right now? Because those two things seem mutually exclusive to me. It's a little depressing when you think about it,
Scriabin said, apparently ignoring him.
A gigantic realm of pure possibility without the chains of logical limitations, and all you can think of is nothing. Not even a chair or anything. Are you going to answer the question or not?
Edgar frowned.
I really don't know why you're so insistent on this little detour. It's not like you're taking any advantage of it. It doesn't even cross your passive little mind to change anything, always so accepting of whatever reality decides to show you. Although, considering who or what you're looking at.
Scriabin turned back around, his arms spread wide with that same irritating smile.
Your grip on reality is a bit tenuous, isn't it?
Edgar stayed where he was, unsmiling and unmoving.
If you're not going to answer the question, do you at least want to explain what you're talking about? Which part?
Scriabin was clearly enjoying this.
God, am I going to have to go through a whole list with you one item at a time? Ugh. I didn't insist on any kind of detour.
Edgar shook his head.
I don't even know where we are. I told you where we are. It's not my fault you weren't paying attention. You told me something, which doesn't mean anything about whether or not it's true. You didn't specify that it had to be true. I gave you a name, a place. Is it my fault you won't accept any answer I offer you? God damn it.
Edgar pinched the bridge of his nose.
Okay. What do you mean by detour? A diversion between point A and point B. More like a rest stop, really.
And for a second, Scriabin's smile faltered, like he hadn't meant to say that much. He rallied quickly.
Surely all the blunt force trauma hasn't wiped your brain of basic word definitions, has it? If so, this is going to be very boring for me. A rest stop? Why wouldn't he want to say that? I'd so hate to be boring for you,
Edgar said, with a roll of his eyes, and annoyingly, Scriabin just gave him a pleased tilt of his head in response.
You said this is a realm of pure possibility? It's your imagination, Edgar.
Scriabin gave him a very wide smirk. He could almost feel the smugness coming off of him.
Have you ever seen something so totally, completely barren?
Edgar wasn't taking this bait.
It's what you say is my imagination. I have absolutely no reason to trust you. I think the most telling aspect of it is that you still have those.
Scriabin pointed beneath his own eyes, and Edgar reached up unconsciously to touch his scars. He could see them now in Scriabin's glasses, little slashes of red against his skin.
It'd be child's play to get rid of them, if you had the inclination. But you don't, do you? Which is going to be the focus of our little symposium today. Tonight. Whatever.
Scriabin shrugged, smiling.
Time doesn't exist when you're dead.
Edgar gave him an exaggerated look over, even though it made him feel a little sick. Scriabin shouldn't exist like this. He shouldn't be. Staring at the impossible for too long was getting to him.
You complaining about how I look? Are you going to tell me I'm the one who made you look that handsome next? Don't hate me because I'm beautiful.
Scriabin spun in place, like he was showing off for him, and his coat followed his movements almost too slowly.
This place is defined by your thoughts, not mine. If there's anyone to blame for it, it's you. So logically it follows that if I define the reality in this place, then you wouldn't be here. Well, you certainly tried to kick me out of here, but Lord knows I never do what you want me to do. I apparently did a lot of things I wasn't aware of before I woke up here, which is awfully convenient, isn't it? Edgar said. The only one I've seen alter reality in here so far has been you. He gestured at his glasses. Tell me, I'm wishing you out of existence as we speak, and yet you're still here. Why is that if all of this is under my control? You can put someone in a car, but if they don't know how to drive, they're not going to get anywhere. You've ceded so much control of your life to others, you can't even recognize power when you have it. One of those lovely little tragic ironies of your life. Even when you're dead, you can't stop shooting yourself in the foot. It's kind of amazing, actually. You never did explain how I'm dead and in my own mind at the same time. Edgar pointed at him. What did you mean by rest stop? A rare moment where Scriabin paused in apparent thought, and he looked upwards towards where the ceiling would have been, had there been any kind of recognizable place. He brushed a stray bit of hair away from his face, unsmiling, a brief moment of sobriety striking after how gleeful he'd been just moments ago. It passed then, gone in an instant, although the after-image of it stuck in Edgar's mind. Quiet seriousness was not something that suited Scriabin. Something about it made him uneasy. Scriabin held his hands behind his back again, leaning forward a little towards him. Oh, did you forget another word definition? I guess getting kicked repeatedly in the head can do a number on your memory. I'm onto something. I'm sure of it. But what? You wanted to call this a detour. Said it was from point A to point B. So, what are point A and B? Is point A my mind, and point B heaven? Not that I believe any of this is true. Scriabin crossed his own arms, and while he didn't seem too perturbed, he wasn't smiling as easily as he was before. The way he spoke gave Edgar the impression he was thinking hard. Would an easier analogy for you to grasp be pressing pause on a VCR? So, we're paused right now? Edgar looked around again, although he wasn't sure why. Everything was just as blank as always. Then he looked back to Scriabin with his eyes narrowed. Did you pause us? And Scriabin gave him a malicious and knowing smile. Maybe. Edgar shivered in spite of himself. He didn't like that look on his face at all. You paused me dying? You can do that? It wasn't meant as praise or a compliment, but that was clearly how Scriabin took it. It certainly does seem to be the case, doesn't it? He was smiling fit to burst. I think you'd be surprised to find out what I can do. If he could do this, what else could he do to me? Edgar shook his head, refocused, regained required distance. That's assuming I am dying, which I still haven't seen any proof of. You've lied to me before, and you're probably lying now. You have the power to stop death itself. Forgive me for being a little skeptical. Scriabin held his hands out in a shrug, unbothered. As I said, what you believe about something doesn't actually change what it is. Throwing tantrums about what I can and can't do has never served you well before. It, likewise, doesn't change reality, even in a place that invites that very thing. If I could change reality, I'd make you tell the truth for once, but that's clearly never going to happen. Edgar pressed a hand to his forehead with a sigh. What was it you said before? You wanted us to have a productive conversation. Is that why you set up this whole scenario? Productive, unproductive. Long, short, longer. And Edgar squinted at him. A conversation is the goal here. and there are some rather important things we really need to discuss in depth. Some that are very relevant to the fact you're dead, in fact. Long and longer? Why does he want me to keep talking? Sure, there's nothing else to do here, but he must have set this up for a reason. It doesn't sound like he's interested in the conversation itself, just that we keep having it. But why? Whose goal? Yours? Well, yes.
Scriabin put his hands in his pockets again with another tilt of his head. His hair fell over his face, perfectly disheveled.
You never want to talk to me, after all. And after I do all this work just to help you.
He looked up again with a long-suffering sigh.
That's gratitude for you. Help me?
Edgar pressed a hand to his chest.
How stupid do you think I am? Whatever this is, and whatever it is you want to talk about, it's for you.
Scriabin touched a knuckle to his lips with a smirk.
I think I've made my opinions about your intelligence very clear.
Edgar crossed his arms and angled away from him, keeping an eye on him sidelong. If what you want is a long conversation, then I'm not exactly in the mood to give you one. I don't know why I should give you anything you want.
I'm sure you won't believe this, but the thought of you being unnecessarily difficult about this did occur to me, my Edgar.
Scriabin moved, somehow, along with Edgar to try and stay in front of him. It was like he wanted to make sure Edgar was looking at him.
But I have this sneaking suspicion that the topic I've chosen is going to be one you'll find hard to ignore. I didn't bring you here after you shuffled rather pathetically off this mortal coil just to give up when you put up a slither of a fight. I'm not like you.
Edgar turned away from him entirely now, unfolding his arms to test the air with his hands. He met no resistance, but he still had no sense of true distance. It was really disorienting. He kept peering into the nothing like that had forced some kind of tangible borders, vertical or horizontal, to appear.
There has to be a way out of here.
There was a pause in the conversation that was almost deafening, and Edgar considered turning around to look at Scriabin, but found he had no desire to do so. Every time he looked at Scriabin, he felt his heart jump into his throat and his stomach turn. Something felt very wrong and yet very familiar about him, particularly seeing him in motion, and that familiarity was starting to trigger some emotion or acceptance in Edgar's mind of something he didn't want to think about. He felt his heartbeat rise as he even glanced over it. What Scriabin could mean. What Scriabin's presence could possibly mean.
This is what I wanted to talk to you about.
Curiosity did kill the cat. When Edgar turned around, his previous surprise at seeing Scriabin come to life was nothing compared to what he felt now. He stumbled back against the white with a sharp, pained gasp, clutching his shirt closest to his heart, as Scriabin serenely closed the distance between them.
But I saw... But how? No. Oh, don't look so surprised.
The sheer enjoyment in Scriabin's voice was obvious as he leaned in close to Edgar, his now dark blue hair brushing against him.
I told you you could change your appearance in here.
Edgar tried to scramble away from him at the contact, but Scriabin simply floated after him, still smiling. God, it was so wrong to see that sarcastic smile on his face. On Johnny's...
Scriabin, that's just sick!
Edgar finally blurted out, his voice revealing more emotion than he would have liked.
This is so wrong, he shouldn't be able to do this. How can he do this? He's dead, how could you?
At the sound of his distress, Scriabin laughed again, this time with genuine enjoyment. He rested one claw-like finger on his chin as he looked upwards in a mockery of a scholarly way. Seeing Johnny's body do this, even if Scriabin was controlling it, made Edgar nauseous.
Not exactly the reaction I was expecting, but interesting nonetheless.
God, everything about Johnny was perfectly imitated, from the dark stringy hair to his hollow cheeks. Even his clothes had been perfectly recreated down to his steel-toed boots. And yet, in Johnny's face, Edgar could see Scriabin inside, using the body as if it were some kind of puppet.
What do you think?
Scriabin's smirk on Johnny's face shouldn't exist.
I think this topic will keep you engaged, don't you? Scriabin, this is wrong, and I'm not going to be part of it.
Edgar turned away from the Johnny facsimile and crossed his arms, staring intently at his feet.
Go away, stop it and go away. Stop it right now, you shouldn't be able to do this.
Scriabin Vargas, go to your room, Scriabin said, high and mocking.
Edgar, you're going to have to sound angrier if you want people to take you seriously, and that's a big if.
Edgar crossed his arms tighter and tried to move as far away from Scriabin as he could in this strange place. Without distance, there was no way to increase it. He closed himself off as best he could in terms of body language, refusing to speak as if by ignoring Scriabin he could make him stop.
Why are you shying away from me as if I'm going to attack you?
Scriabin asked, knowing and smug.
After all, you put so much trust into your relationship with Nee. Why on earth do you think that I would hurt you? Because you're not. Oh, that's right. This entire relationship is based on pain, on voluntary submission and eventual but quite assured death. How could I forget that tiny detail? That's not true. It's not true.
Edgar shut his eyes and gripped his arm so hard he couldn't feel his fingers anymore. But he could feel Johnny's, Scriabin's hand as it came to rest on his shoulder. Almost paralyzed, Edgar could only mumble softly in response.
Don't touch me.
Scriabin, of course, entirely ignored him, instead using the grip on his shoulder to bring Edgar closer to him as he rhapsodized to the sky.
Trying to shut me out again. I'm sorry to inform you that you can't ignore me here. Not that you were particularly good at it back when you were alive. Another motivation for this conversation. This time, we are going to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about.
Scriabin ignored him.
I remember it well, don't you? I do. We were so young then, so naive and carefree. He let you go because he didn't need your blood, and then he called you for advice. Of course, back then, you were more intelligent, I would think, not so much in need of my constant guidance. At any rate, it seems that as time goes by, this relationship, and I'm not talking about ours, my boy, has become something other than involuntary.
Not true. Not listening.
Oh, I remember it well. Those little screaming arguments we had some time ago, if you recall, about how you just wanted to observe Johnny, just watch him and find out why he was insane. That you just wanted to stay alive. You didn't have any emotion invested in him. About how you weren't a bad person, even though you did bad things.
The tone that Scriabin used was a perfect imitation of that long-ago argument, and, in response to the words, Edgar felt a familiar stab of rage.
He wasn't. But what is it then, Edgar? What's your justification? Johnny just forcing you into this relationship? Just dragging you down, and yet of course you've done nothing wrong. Yes, that's right. You're so totally innocent in this entire mess. Nothing you ever did was your fault, no. Nothing you ever instigated was your idea, and look at where you are. Imagine actually physically fighting someone, or at least pathetically attempting to protect a homicidal maniac from further pointless damage. What did it all come to? Now you're dead. You're dead because of him, and still you deny that it's your fault.
It's not my fault. Scriabin ignored him as he pulled Edgar closer.
You're so deluded into thinking that you're normal and without faults, that this entire relationship happened without your input, and you have no part in maintaining its existence. But let's face it, Edgar. This is the only relationship that you have, as much as you pretend you don't need them, and it takes two to tango, even if it's in blood. It took 2 people to use that phone and 2 people to hold hands and hug.
A squeeze on his shoulder to emphasize the point.
I'm sure you remember that. That didn't turn out the way we expected, did it? But nothing can really be predicted in this elaborate farce of a real human connection. This is your relationship, Edgar. One that you're mistakenly and bizarrely proud and protective of. And it's getting worse one day at a time. The only relationship in your life that you have, and that you try to protect, to save, is masochistic, twisted, and shamelessly self-destructive.
He was only half listening, focusing more on the physical sensation of Johnny's imitated body.
Don't.
Despite his efforts to break away, Edgar's body refused to respond to his directions. He just stood there shaking as Scriabin steadily drew him closer as he spoke. Could shut his eyes, but do little else. Whether or not it was Scriabin's influence, or it was just the rush of confusion and disgust and everything just crashing in on him, robbing him of his free will, he couldn't say. He tried. He really tried, but in the end he could not resist. The most he could do was raise a hand to feebly press against Scriabin's chest. And God, even touching the fake Johnny's body made him shudder all over. He could feel the ribcage just as before. He could feel the bones underneath his hand. Scriabin snaked his other arm around Edgar's waist and kept a firm grip on his shoulder, keeping him from moving. He wanted to move. Instead, he could feel the bones that he thought he knew so well pressing against his side, his shoulder, his chest and legs. Johnny's impossibly thin body doing things that...
God, no, stop it, this is wrong, no, stop it.
As Scriabin pressed his head beneath Edgar's chin, breathing across his throat softly, Edgar tried as hard as he could to get away. He had to get away, but all he could do was lean his head back, his teeth clenched as he hissed softly. He felt just like him, and that was what made this as horrible as it was.
Scriabin.
He was struggling, but he couldn't move. Something prevented it. The presence near him, the same death-like presence of Johnny so near to him, prevented it.
But that's the whole point, isn't it?
Scriabin whispered, the flow of breath across his skin causing Edgar to shiver uncontrollably. He tried to push him away, but his body wasn't responding, not the way he wanted it to.
The pious little fortune cookie loves to be dominated, controlled. Why else would you trust your life to some father figure that doesn't exist? Follow his rules, submit to his will, punish yourself for breaking imaginary laws. And you like it, Edgar. You're proud of it. You're not ashamed to admit it, and yet now, you fight against it.
Stop, oh God, stop, please, stop it, I don't want to hear this, it isn't true. Why can't I move, why won't he shut up? I don't want to hear this, please stop, please make him stop. I want to run, I'm not like that, and I wouldn't do something like this, and Johnny wouldn't do something like this. It's all a lie, this all has to be a lie.
The thin bones moved and shifted against him, falling in and out of place in a way that was sickeningly familiar. Scriabin's hand on his waist drifted downwards, and his voice remained at a throaty whisper coming from the wrong throat.
Shameful, really.
Stop, 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 stop!
The brief touch of teeth against his skin.
It turns you on.
You're lying.
A flash of fury that apparently only those words could trigger rushed through him, strong enough to give him back the ability to move. With a quick, jerky motion, he threw his arm up and pushed Scriabin away from him.
Get off me!
Scriabin simply floated backwards away from him, completely unbothered. He had a pleased expression on his face, one that Edgar had never seen Johnny get, and it made him feel sick again.
Look, I've tolerated your taunting and insults long enough.
Edgar advanced on him, one hand clenched in a fist at his side while the other one pointed at him.
I'm not going to stand here while you use Nee's body to...
He felt his breath catch as he even tried to talk about what had just happened.
To hit on me. I'm leaving.
Edgar turned away from Scriabin and began walking, or at least as best he could without any clear indication of the ground beneath him. Only a few moments passed in blissful silence before he could hear Scriabin's voice from somewhere.
You know the funny thing about nothing, Edgar?
Scriabin appeared in front of him so suddenly that Edgar could not contain a short gasp of surprise.
It loops in on itself.
Surprise quickly shifted back into anger. Scriabin tapped a finger against his jaw in casual thought, like he knew the appearance of clinical detachment would only annoy Edgar further, which it did.
You know what I think is interesting? Your reaction to me being all sexual and touchy-feely. Do you really expect a relationship like this to last?
There is no relationship.
Wait, no. I remember now. He's going to kill you because he loves you so very much. Not make love to you. Unbelievable.
He wouldn't.
Edgar refused to respond, only shaking with constrained fury. Scriabin looked at him and smiled in that awful, cruel way.
Would you prefer me to act ambivalent, moody, and distant? Is that the only relationship you're comfortable with? After all, that would match your god's profile pretty well, wouldn't it?
He had to keep the emotion out of his voice.
Scriabin, I'm not going to do this. I'm not doing this with you. I am sick of you, and I am sick of your lies. Let me out of here.
Scriabin turned away from him, moving his hand in an imitation of someone talking.
My name is Edgar. I can't handle any conversation that makes me uncomfortable. Don't tell me the truth. I don't want to hear it.
You.
Normally, he refrained from attacking others, but at this point it felt impossible not to.
Is this the productive conversation you wanted to have? You picking me apart for all my mistakes? That's not a conversation. That's a monologue. Though it wouldn't be the first time you've conflated the two. Let's have a conversation then, Scriabin. Let's talk about your flaws, since you're so insistent that this is how we should spend our time here.
Edgar's eyes were tightly narrowed, and he didn't miss at all how Scriabin's borrowed body tensed at his words.
Let's talk about how you've built up this elaborate fixation on my relationship with Nee to the point of using his body to hit on me.
Scriabin turned and stared at Edgar, his eyes wide in apparent disbelief. With a weakness to latch onto, Edgar thought and spoke quickly.
Not only do you assign me flaws that you just make up, you belittle me for flaws that I don't even have that you project onto me. Jesus, you're more afraid of Nee than I am.
The look of shock on his face was priceless. Then, there was a flicker near his darkly rimmed eyes. A small pair of glasses, non-reflective this time, had appeared on Johnny's face, and for once, Scriabin stumbled a little over his words.
Well, you're not supposed to. Where'd those glasses come from?
Edgar's confusion kept him from reveling in his success for a few seconds.
What glasses?
And sure enough, they were gone. You had glasses a second ago. Edgar pointed at him, for once feeling confident. Scriabin was definitely on the defensive now, and God, that felt good. Scriabin finally regained his composure and held out his hands as if to stop the current direction of the conversation.
Okay, look, this isn't about me, this is about you.
Edgar could not resist.
Not exactly the reaction I was expecting, but interesting nonetheless.
Scriabin crossed his arms. He was visibly annoyed now. That was an expression on Johnny that Edgar felt more comfortable with.
I find this sudden attack on me unsettling. Considering who I am, that doesn't reflect well on your self-image. He's trying to get out of this, but failing. I've got him.
And with strange ease, Edgar fell into a very similar tone of voice to the one that Scriabin often used.
You know, I've never seen you this flustered. Or heard you, as the case may be. You're contradicting yourself. Is it because I'm fighting back? For someone who complains about me being too passive, you sure don't like it when I stand up to you.
Scriabin held up a hand as if to stop Edgar from talking and closed his eyes. Now that he had the advantage, Edgar wasn't about to stop.
You know, I can see why you like tearing people down so much. It's kind of fun.
With a gesture of his hand, glasses appeared from the nothing and fell into Scriabin's thin fingers. With a sigh, Scriabin put them on and glared.
All right. Allow me to explain. I hid these glasses because they are a comfort item to you. You may recall that whenever you feel particularly weak, your glasses are missing, and that every time you put your glasses back on, you feel more strong and capable. When you feel weak and helpless, your glasses make you feel better. You have this association, I have this association. I hid them because I didn't want to embarrass you.
The size of the glasses on Johnny's face was enough to make his stomach lurch again.
You're lying and you take those off.
Scriabin blinked at him and then brightened with a wide smile.
Wait a minute. Do these glasses bother you? Does the concept of knee and glasses bother you?
Edgar's stubborn silence answered the question.
How interesting.
He sounded sincere.
Well, that didn't last long.
Just as quickly as Edgar had latched onto Scriabin's perceived weakness, Scriabin turned on him in return, and unfortunately, he had a great deal more experience in this field.
It's another thing that you and Nee share this way. That's what's creeping you out, isn't it? The thought of you and Nee getting closer and closer, becoming more similar. It ruins your image of superiority.
Edgar turned away from Scriabin and crossed his arms, closing his eyes.
I don't... Just take them off, okay?
He could feel Scriabin approaching him from behind, a few strands of his hair touching the back of his neck.
What bothers you more, Edgar? The thought of Nee being sane, or you being crazy? Stop it.
Scriabin rested his fingers on Edgar's shoulder and leaned in close, his mouth beside his ear. Before Edgar could react, his other hand reached around and removed Edgar's glasses. And before he could do anything to respond to Scriabin's unwelcome proximity, something happened. He could feel it, the breath passing by his ear and flowing past his scarred cheek. He could feel the air leave Johnny's body under Scriabin's control. The knowledge that Scriabin was in control of that body, not Johnny, was what had sustained Edgar through most of this torment. But this was cruel. The words unmistakably came from him, from that body, and within those words, the thorns. The same cadence, the same strange broken tone, the same soft, dangerous voice. But it was those thorns, those sharp and dangerous thorns that proved they were unmistakably knees, unmistakably from Johnny C. Not Scriabin, not Edgar. No. And the thorns jabbed into his heart and caused him to give a gasp of surprise, caused his body to fill with adrenaline, with utter panic and shock, to fill with the strange feeling that he did not know or understand because he had never felt or expected to feel it. Nothing in his life had ever prepared him for something like this. Edgar, I love you. And something in his mind snapped. He gave a strangled, shocked noise as if someone had struck him and he nearly collapsed, his mouth frozen open. The heat rushing to his face felt almost blinding. His glasses were gone and all that was around him was white, and the words kept running through his head with the perfect danger in each syllable. Every logical part of his mind tried to disprove it, tried to stop it, tried to erase it, but it kept repeating, over and over, with the feeling of Johnny's body pressed against his back and the feel of his breathing, and he couldn't deny that, no matter how many times he told himself it was Scriabin, because it was just too much. Just too much. Edgar was struggling to breathe correctly, his lungs refusing to cooperate as he tried to erase what happened, tried to justify it, tried to reduce the utter horror he felt at those words, the pure and utter terror and the fear at those sharp words that cut through every logical thing he could say. It cut through every small hope that he had for himself and for Johnny. It cut through everything, and why not? After all, that was what thorns did. And it was fear he felt. That was all he could feel. Anything else would be wrong, and this was definitely fear. It had to be fear, and oh God. Scriabin had moved away from him some time ago, although he hadn't gone far. He hadn't said anything as he watched and presumably enjoyed Edgar writhing in a mental paradox of emotion. When he did speak, Scriabin sounded very quiet and level, although there was a hint of a smile in his words.
Not a bad impression, It certainly impressed you, if that's the word for it.
Edgar could not respond. He wouldn't respond. Not now. He couldn't say anything except incoherent mixtures of syllables. Scriabin watched him for a few seconds before speaking again. This time his tone was dead serious.
You know what the saddest part is?
He couldn't breathe. Scriabin spoke with deliberate slowness so that not one word would be missed.
That's the only time you will ever hear him say that.
And he was right. Somehow, this had some effect on Edgar. Perhaps it pushed his overworked emotional state over the brink right back into apathy again. Perhaps it was because Scriabin had admitted that he had imitated Johnny's voice that made it a little bit easier to swallow. Either way, he could breathe again. When Edgar spoke, his voice was surprisingly calm.
Give me back my glasses.
There was silence as he was sure Scriabin was staring at him in disbelief. The heat was still present on Edgar's face, but he didn't want to touch his scars. He didn't want Scriabin to see that.
I find it deplorable and shameful that in a realm of infinite possibility, you still try to shift responsibility to someone else. Do you fear control?
I don't want to talk about this anymore. I don't want to talk to you ever again.
I just want them back.
Scriabin glared at him.
Get them yourself.
He clenched his fists and shut his eyes once again, his only remaining method of shutting Scriabin out.
I made you so obey me. Give me my glasses. God, I hate you so much. Why are you doing this to me?
You almost make this painful, Scriabin said, with distaste and a disappointed sigh. Here.
Edgar felt his glasses being pressed into his hand.
You're pathetic. You can believe in a big daddy god with all your heart, but not enough in yourself to make a single pair of glasses.
I don't want to hear this.
Edgar let out a shaky breath as he put his glasses back on. The aftermath of all that emotion left him tired and drained. That was one reason why he tried so hard to avoid it. The exact memory of what happened was already fading as his mind struggled to repair its shattered defense system, move along as if it never happened.
Haven't you had enough? Haven't you gotten enough out of me already? I know you want to talk for some reason, but I'm tired and we're just arguing in circles. We're not accomplishing anything. Is this really the only thing we can do in here? If you can make things out of nothing, can't you make a TV or something so we don't have to keep...
Something tight and sudden around his neck cut him off. Puzzled, Edgar tried to reach upwards to investigate, but found that his hands were not responding. When he looked down, he saw that his hands were not only tied tightly together with leather straps, but a longer cord ran from them down into the white until it faded into nothing, preventing him from lifting his hands at all. From the pressure against the bottom of his throat when he looked down, he assumed that there was something of a collar there. When he tried to step back, he found that the same straps that had tied his hands had also formed around his legs, preventing him from moving anywhere. While Edgar was making these discoveries, Scriabin was talking, but not looking at him.
It's so typical for you to try and abandon a conversation once it starts getting uncomfortable, when things get too difficult and personal, when you get too close to behaving and feeling like a normal person. You know, giving away control of your own mental world leaves you open to some rather embarrassing situations.
Scriabin turned and raised an eyebrow at Edgar. With a few more gestures, a leash appeared in Scriabin's hand with a metal clasp. At the sight of it, Edgar could feel every fibre in his being react, but bound as he was, there was little he could do. He did not want that on him. But that didn't really matter, did it? With no hesitation or fear of Edgar's potential resistance, Scriabin simply fastened the leash onto the collar. And Edgar didn't do anything.
Of course, if you don't like it, feel free to stop me.
There wasn't anything sadistic in his voice for once. This was a challenge, delivered with no smile and nearly no emotion. Edgar's face was burning, and God, he hated that. Something in him pushed past it to try and find reason. Something kept his voice level and calm while he internally was anything but.
This is insulting and degrading to both of us. Let me go.
Why is he doing this to me?
Scriabin did not respond verbally. Instead, he wrapped the leash around his fist and yanked, causing Edgar to nearly fall forward. He kept the line taut as Edgar tried to fight against it, his breathing strained.
Scriabin!
Inexorably, Scriabin dragged Edgar forward. He couldn't keep his balance with both his hands and legs tied. Scriabin knew he wouldn't be able to, and he fell to his knees with a frustrated grunt. He couldn't see the ground. There was nothing to see anywhere around him, but it was hard enough to make his knees ache a little. For all that he tried, he couldn't break free, and Scriabin pulled hard on the leash to force him to look up at him. His words were calculated as he spoke down to him, frustrated and slow.
You get down on your knees. I'm dominating you. I own you, Edgar. Your actions are mine, ordained by my logic. I control your emotion. I control your thought. You're below me. You've always been below me. And if you've ever had the balls to fight for yourself or your dignity, get up. Make these bindings disappear and believe in yourself. Find your goddamn spine.
So this has a point. Edgar shut his eyes and tried as hard as he could to make it all disappear. To undo the clasps, untie the knots, make all of this just stop. He focused as hard as he could, poured everything he had into erasing this entire experience. And when he opened his eyes, it was all still there. Although there was a new pressure around his chest, a whitish rope that looped around him. And when he looked upwards and behind him to try and track where it was going, he saw a series of them ascending from his back. They hung posed and empty, like the skeleton of wings. With each breath, they got tighter around him. Scriabin didn't look surprised.
I suppose that answers my question then. Pathetic.
Edgar had tried. He had really tried, and somehow, all he'd done was get himself more tied up. Why? Everything had been focused on getting rid of these bindings, not creating more of them. He had asked Scriabin for advice since he had first heard his voice. Without thought, that was what Edgar did now.
What's happening to me?
He didn't expect sympathy.
My goodness, Edgar. Surely this blatant and rather unsubtle symbolism isn't lost on you, is it? Do I have to explain this as well? You must at least be able to understand the wing-like structure those bindings took.
Why did I say anything? I don't want to hear this. Shut up.
The weight kept growing. He felt heavy and it was getting harder and harder to breathe. He could feel something cold against his arms and legs, something heavier dragging him down, and he could see more chains writhing up to lock around him. Scriabin reached lazily out for a stray rope that was hanging near him and pulled. Edgar lifted off of whatever floor this place had, suspended by the ropes that now not only expanded from his back, but from the collar and the bindings around his legs as well. He was tied down and up from every possible direction. Scriabin had a definite vicious edge to his voice now.
You're trying to break free, so I won't tell you anymore, aren't you?
The clink of chains as they continued to wrap around his legs.
You're getting more and more restrained as you give me more and more control. Your attempts at freedom keep backfiring because you shouldn't be trying to escape from me. You should just do it. You hate me so much, and yet you give me so much power.
In the depths of his confusion and hatred, Edgar resorted to his most basic defense against him.
Scriabin, you're lying.
Edgar took in a shaky breath, closing his eyes so he couldn't see what was holding him down. Tell himself that it wasn't happening. He was fine. He was speaking calmly. The situation and himself under control.
I didn't do this to myself. You did it to me. And now you're blaming me for it in an effort to undermine my confidence. How much power can you have if you have to trick me through elaborate illusions to admit things that aren't true? I'm not going to take responsibility for this. I'm not the one who did it. I have literally no reason to believe anything different.
Scriabin had come close to him while he was talking. He rested a hand on his shoulder and placed a finger on Edgar's lips.
Shut up.